Welcome to another Murphy's Adventures. We're coming to you from the 18th century town of Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt was actually a garrison town built for 7,000 soldiers to keep away the German hordes. This is ironic because in 1940 this is exactly what happened when the Germans move into Bohemian area and take over Theresienstadt. They soon find it to be a very practical town, so they turn it into a Gestapo prison to intern, of course, the Czech people that are against the Nazis. But after the Wannsee Conference in 1942, they turn it into a concentration camp, and they move in the Jews from Berlin and other towns by the trainload. The Nazis wanted to sell Theresienstadt as a propaganda ghetto. They wanted to make the Jews feel more assured of their survival, so they would go in there voluntarily. So they even sold them a return ticket, or said they were going to some sort of an old people's home in which they would have their own apartment with lake views. So you can imagine that if you arrive at Theresienstadt expecting to move into your retirement home with a view of the lake, that you would be crammed into the Hamburger Kaserne. And in the Hamburger Kaserne, you would be standing on frozen urine from the overflowing toilet system, because the city was inhabited by 60,000 people instead of 7,000 people. So the canalization, the channeling, the sewers and everything was completely overloaded. And this is how you arrived as a elderly, rich Dutch or German Jew. The strange thing is that nowadays, in present times, this is of course a Gedenkstätte. It's a memorial site. You can visit it. It is open air. It's open to the public. And the weird thing is, when you walk into this, what you think is going to be a memorial site for a concentration camp, you're actually walking into a somewhat functioning town. There are people living there, not because they like it so much or anything, because the rents are very cheap. So you see, well, almost disgruntled looking people walking around. They really don't want to live there. It became even more of a propaganda ghetto after the Danes insisted that the quarters of their Danish Jews were inspected by the Red Cross. Now, this was a concentration camp, and this concentration camp turned into a movie set, as they had 1 year to prepare for this visit. And it was actually a movie set because they didn't only have actors, they even had coulisses. So you weren't allowed to look into the side streets, because then you would see the true face of the concentration camp. So the Maurice, the inspector of the Red Cross, was actually led through certain paths that were completely orchestrated for his visit. The walls were painted, the people were well fed, happy children that were chewing chocolate and playing around in fresh clothes, which was absolutely nowhere near the reality of the concentration camp. Walking around a memorial place with a dog is weird. It's a weird sensation. And even Murphy was actually sort of like demure. She was not certain of what was going on. She almost sensed that there was something weird, until, of course, she ran into the nutrias, which is sort of like a big beaver rat, and she went berserk. So Murphy's now cooling down in the creek that was watering the vegetable gardens that were also planted for this propaganda visit. In total, there were about 150,000 people moving through Theresienstadt, of which 70,000 were senior citizens. But there were also 15,000 children that were worked through this concentration camp, and of these 15,000 children, less than 200 survived. So it's a very deadly city. You can actually say that of the 150,000 people that were moved through Theresienstadt, only 10% survived. So it's actually a very deadly concentration camp, and this is why you cannot call it a ghetto, because a ghetto almost insinuates some sort of a survival chance. But the survival chance on Theresienstadt or in Theresienstadt was very low.